The night was silent, and the house seemed to breathe in slow, deliberate rhythms that matched my own. My children were asleep in their rooms, their soft breaths echoing faintly in the stillness, each sound amplified by the dark emptiness around them. I sat alone at my computer, the screen casting a pale glow across my face, illuminating lines of worry I had tried to ignore all day. Outside, the world was quiet, yet inside, something did not feel right. I could feel a tension settling in my chest, a small, persistent whisper in my mind that warned me to pay attention, even when all seemed calm. The basement door, usually locked at this hour, stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me to look, to discover something I was not meant to see. I had noticed the door before, but tonight it seemed different. Shadows from the hallway stretched across the floor, twisting and shifting with a faint flicker of the hallway light. I told myself I was imagining things, that the noises I heard were the house settling or the wind brushing against the walls. Yet, deep inside, I knew that intuition was rarely wrong, and tonight, it screamed at me to be cautious. I turned back to the computer, attempting to distract myself, and yet my eyes kept drifting to the folders that had appeared overnight on the desktop. They were neatly organized, labeled with vague names that meant nothing to me, yet something about them made my skin prickle. I moved the mouse slowly, hovering over one folder labeled only as Archives, my hand trembling slightly. When I clicked, a password prompt appeared. My heart skipped a beat. My son and daughter-in-law had always been secretive about their computer use, but I had never imagined it could be for something so hidden, so deliberate. I hesitated, staring at the prompt, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity wash over me. Part of me wanted to close the folder, to convince myself that this was none of my business, that I was overthinking. Yet another part of me, a stronger part, urged me to see what they were hiding. I typed a guess, nothing too complicated, and the screen refused entry, the red error flashing sharply in the dim light. I tried again, my hands clammy, my pulse racing. Each failed attempt seemed to echo in the silent house, a loud and taunting reminder that something was buried here, something I was not supposed to uncover. A soft hum from the basement interrupted my thoughts. The sound of a computer fan, steady and mechanical, but different from the usual quiet noise of their laptops. I froze, every nerve in my body alert. The children shifted slightly in their sleep, murmuring faintly, and I instinctively glanced at their rooms to make sure they were safe. They were. Their small bodies curled beneath the blankets, completely unaware of the tension gathering like a storm around us. I returned my gaze to the screen. The folders seemed to multiply, appearing and disappearing as if the computer itself were breathing, alive and aware of my presence. Some files were labeled with dates, others with cryptic codes, and a few had titles that made my stomach tighten. Names that I recognized, but in ways that filled me with unease. I felt as if I had stepped into a world I was never meant to enter, a secret realm that existed behind the screens and passwords, hidden from the daylight and the innocent eyes of my children. A sudden click from the basement made me jump. My hand froze on the mouse. My mind raced. I told myself it was only the house, only the wind, but every rational thought was drowned by the pounding of my heart. I could feel the sweat forming at the back of my neck as my curiosity battled with instinct. Should I go and check? Should I leave it alone? My maternal instincts, sharp and unwavering, told me that something was very wrong, that my children could be in danger if I did not act. Slowly, I rose from the chair, my eyes never leaving the faint glow under the basement door. Each step I took toward the hallway made the floorboards creak beneath me, each sound louder than it should have been in the stillness of the night. My hands gripped the railing as I descended the first step, my breath shallow and measured. The hum from the basement grew louder, more purposeful, almost as if it knew I was coming. I could see the flicker of screens through the gap in the door, light spilling in irregular patterns across the walls. Something was happening down there, something that belonged only to my son and daughter-in-law, and yet now, somehow, it involved me. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, the darkness thick and almost tangible. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I thought of every warning I had ever ignored, every instinct I had brushed aside. And then a movement caught my eye. A shadow shifted near the computers, and I realized with a chill that they were not alone in their secret. The basement, once just a place of storage and quiet, had transformed into a place of mystery, danger, and hidden truths. I knew, at that moment, that nothing would ever be the same. Whatever awaited me in that basement at 4 o'clock in the morning would change our lives forever. My children were sleeping upstairs, oblivious to the storm about to break, and I was standing on the edge of a revelation I was not sure I was prepared to face. My hands shook, my heart raced, and yet I could not turn away. I had to know. The house was quiet in a way that made every sound feel louder than it should have been. The soft ticking of the kitchen clock echoed faintly through the walls, marking the passage of time in the stillness. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, brushing leaves against the windows, yet the sound seemed distant, almost polite, compared to the tension that filled the air inside. My children slept in their rooms, curled beneath their blankets, their small bodies rising and falling with gentle breaths. I had checked on them twice before, walking past their doors and watching them from the hallway, making sure they were safe, unaware of the storm that waited in the shadows of the basement. I returned to my computer, the soft glow of the screen casting an eerie light across the room. The folders I had noticed the night before remained, a silent reminder that something in my family was not as simple as it seemed. I had tried to dismiss it at first, telling myself that everyone needed privacy, that it was normal for my son and daughter-in-law to have their own secrets. Yet the combination of the basement door being left slightly ajar and the unusual hum of their computers at odd hours gnawed at my intuition. There was something here, something hidden beneath the veneer of normal family life, and my instincts refused to ignore it. The living room, normally warm and comforting during the day, now seemed foreign and oppressive. The furniture cast long, angular shadows beneath the dim light of the hallway, and every object seemed to hold a secret. My eyes kept drifting to the basement door, the source of a low, steady hum that I could not identify. The sound was not unpleasant, yet it carried a mechanical rhythm that made my heart tighten. I remembered the nights when I had heard similar noises and dismissed them as the house settling or the refrigerator running, but tonight it felt different. There was intent in the sound, a purpose that made me feel unwelcome, as if someone or something was aware of my presence and waiting. I sat down again at the computer and opened a new document, hoping to distract myself with work. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, yet the words refused to come. My mind kept drifting back to the basement, to the folders that appeared overnight, and to the shadows that seemed to gather there. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but my intuition, honed by years of attention to small details and quiet instincts, screamed at me to pay attention. There was a secret in this house, one that involved my son, my daughter-in-law, and possibly, though I did not want to admit it, my children. The desktop was cluttered with icons, yet the new folders stood out, almost daring me to investigate. Their names were cryptic, nothing I recognized, and they were protected by a password that I did not know. I had watched my son and daughter-in-law enter the password once, quickly, their fingers moving with a precision that made me realize they had done this many times before. I remembered the fleeting glance of their expressions, a combination of annoyance and caution as they closed the folders before I could see. That fleeting glimpse had planted a seed of curiosity, but now it had grown into a deep, gnawing anxiety. The children stirred slightly, murmuring in their sleep, and I paused, my hand resting lightly on the mouse. I could not ignore their presence. They were unaware of the tension that had built up over the past few days, blissfully innocent in a world that was about to become complicated and frightening. I reminded myself to stay calm, to think carefully, because any sudden decision could put them at risk. Yet, even as I repeated these thoughts, my eyes could not leave the basement door, nor could I stop thinking about the folders and the mechanical hum that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat beneath the house. I remembered the small details that I had dismissed earlier. The locked drawer in the office, the hidden USB drives my son always carried, and the way he and his wife spoke in hushed tones when they thought I was not listening. Each detail, insignificant on its own, now formed a pattern that I could not ignore. Something was happening in that basement, something they did not want me to know, and I had to prepare myself for whatever I was about to discover. I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the hallway, my bare feet pressing softly against the carpet. The light from the computer faded behind me, leaving only the dim glow of the hallway light and the shadows it created along the walls. I paused at the top of the stairs leading to the basement, listening carefully. The hum was louder now, steady and insistent, as if calling me forward. My hand brushed against the railing, steadying myself, though my pulse raced. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, and to approach cautiously. Each step I took down the stairs was deliberate, measured, careful. The air grew cooler and heavier with each movement, carrying the faint scent of metal and electricity, a combination that made my stomach twist. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement stretched before me, partially illuminated by the soft glow of multiple computer screens. The hum of fans and machines filled the space, mingling with the faint click of keyboards. I could see shadows moving across the screens, shadows that belonged to no one I expected to see at this hour. My eyes widened as I realized that the basement was not simply a storage area or a place for work. It had become a hidden world, alive with digital activity, a secret realm where my son and daughter-in-law had built something I could barely comprehend. I froze, listening to the mechanical symphony before me, trying to understand the purpose behind it all. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I knew, deep in my heart, that this was not ordinary, that whatever was happening down there could have consequences far beyond anything I had imagined. Yet, despite the fear that gripped me, a small but persistent voice inside urged me forward. I had to know the truth, whatever the cost. I turned briefly to glance at the staircase leading to my children's rooms. They were safe for now, but I understood that the events about to unfold in the basement would change everything. I swallowed hard and took another step forward, the cold air brushing against my skin, the hum of computers growing louder with each movement. The secret of the basement awaited, and I could not turn away. My life, and the lives of my children, were about to be swept into a reality I had never prepared for, and yet I could not stop myself from stepping further into the shadows. The evening had begun like any other, quiet and ordinary, yet beneath the surface, a tension lingered that I could not shake. I had prepared dinner for the children and myself, arranging plates on the table, watching the steam rise gently from the food, yet my mind was elsewhere. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock could not compete with the thoughts that crowded my mind. My son and daughter-in-law moved about the house with deliberate normalcy, but there was a rigidity in their movements, a carefulness in their voices that seemed designed to avoid scrutiny. I poured myself a cup of tea, steam curling into the air in delicate wisps, and carried it to the living room, trying to focus on the mundane comfort of warmth. The children sat nearby, absorbed in their books and toys, completely unaware of the tension that hung in the air. Their innocence was a fragile barrier against the unease that had settled in my chest. I reminded myself to stay calm, to observe quietly, to gather evidence in small, unobtrusive ways. Maternal instinct told me to protect them, yet curiosity pressed me toward the truth I sensed was just out of reach. The basement door caught my attention again. It was closed, locked, as it always was, but the small gap beneath it allowed a sliver of light to escape. The faint glow hinted at activity, and I could not ignore it. I had noticed the subtle changes in the household over the past weeks, the late-night computer use, the hurried whispers when I approached the office, and the hidden USB drives that appeared and disappeared with uncanny precision. Each detail, insignificant in isolation, now formed a pattern I could not ignore. Something was happening in that basement, and I had to understand it before it became too late. I moved closer to the door, listening intently. The hum of electronics was faint, but unmistakable. It was not the ordinary noise of a laptop or a desktop running. It had a rhythm, deliberate and steady, as if the machines were performing a task that required concentration and secrecy. My fingers traced the doorknob, cold metal against my skin, and I paused, knowing that my decision in the next moments could alter everything. I decided against opening it for now. I had to observe, to gather information without alerting them to my awareness. Returning to the living room, I settled into the sofa, my tea cooling in its cup. My eyes kept darting toward the hallway that led to the staircase and the basement. Every small sound, a creak of a floorboard or the rustle of paper, seemed amplified in the quiet night. My mind played through scenarios, imagining what they could be doing below. I tried to convince myself that perhaps it was harmless, a project, a hobby, a secret shared between husband and wife. But intuition had a way of revealing truths that logic often denied. I pulled the children close, observing the way they interacted, the innocence in their gestures, the way they laughed quietly at small, imagined jokes. It struck me how unaware they were of the tension that had infiltrated the house, how easily they could be caught in circumstances they did not understand. My heart tightened at the thought. I had to protect them, to keep them safe from the consequences of whatever activity was hidden in the basement. Yet at the same time, I needed to understand it. Ignorance would leave us vulnerable, and I could not allow that. My son entered the room quietly, laptop in hand, eyes flicking briefly toward me before settling on the screen. He did not acknowledge my presence with words, but the tension between us was palpable. I could sense the careful precision in his movements, the way his fingers danced across the keyboard with a practiced ease that suggested familiarity with secrecy. My daughter-in-law followed shortly, carrying a stack of papers and a notebook, her expression neutral yet guarded. She avoided direct eye contact, and I noted the slight hesitation in her steps, the way she positioned herself in relation to my son and the computers. They spoke in hushed tones, words blending into the background noise of the room. Occasionally, a phrase would drift clearly to me, technical terminology I barely understood, numbers and codes, mentions of accounts and transfers. Each word sent a shiver through me. I realized then that this was no ordinary activity. There was an intentionality to their work, a precision and secrecy that suggested high stakes. I listened carefully, committing each detail to memory. I would need every fragment of information when the time came to confront them, if that time ever arrived. The children, sensing the change in atmosphere, began to fidget. I smiled softly at them, kneeling to adjust a blanket around one of their shoulders, trying to reassure them without drawing attention to the tension in the room. Their small hands gripped my own as they whispered questions about the noises and shadows. I answered gently, inventing explanations that would comfort them while keeping the truth hidden. I could not risk frightening them. My maternal instincts demanded protection, but my mind screamed for vigilance. I returned to the computer after a few moments, my gaze falling again on the folders that had appeared overnight. I had not attempted to open them yet, fearful of alerting my son and daughter-in-law, but my curiosity was insistent. The glow of the screen reflected in my eyes, drawing me closer. I could see glimpses of file names, cryptic combinations of letters and numbers, some of which included references I did not understand. It was enough to confirm my suspicion that the basement contained secrets far beyond ordinary household matters. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching into an eternity. I watched the way my son moved between the desk and the basement, how my daughter-in-law organized papers, how the computers hummed softly, performing tasks that remained hidden from my view. The calm before the storm was tangible. Everything seemed normal to an outsider, yet I could feel the tension coiling like a spring, waiting for the moment it would release its full force. I understood then that the events of the night, the choices I would make in the coming hours, would define the safety and future of my children and myself. I resolved to be patient, to watch, to gather knowledge before acting. My instincts told me that a sudden confrontation would only escalate the situation. I could wait, I could observe, and in the silence of the evening, I would prepare myself for whatever awaited in the basement. The calm before the storm was deceptive, masking the danger that lurked below, yet it offered me the precious opportunity to understand, to plan, and to protect. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet of the house fill my senses, and allowed my mind to focus on the details I had observed. The hum of the computers, the flicker of screens, the careful movements of my son and daughter-in-law, and the oblivious innocence of my children, all of it formed a puzzle that demanded attention. I knew that soon, very soon, the storm would arrive, and I had to be ready to face it with clarity, courage, and resolve. The night had grown darker, the moon hidden behind thick clouds that allowed only the faintest light to filter through the windows. The house was quiet, yet the quiet was heavy, oppressive, filled with a sense of expectation I could not ignore. My children slept soundly in their rooms, yet I could not find comfort in their peacefulness. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind outside, seemed amplified, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for what was about to unfold. I sat at the edge of the living room sofa, my eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the basement. The faint hum I had noticed earlier had grown louder, deeper, more deliberate. It was not the ordinary noise of electronics operating at night. It carried a rhythm, a pulse, that seemed almost intentional, as if the machines themselves were alive and aware of my presence. My hands rested on my knees, trembling slightly, as I tried to steady my racing heart. I told myself to remain calm, to observe carefully, and to remember that my children's safety depended on my composure. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a flicker of light beneath the basement door. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it drew my attention with a magnetic force I could not resist. The hum and the flicker together suggested activity, purposeful and secretive. I rose slowly from the sofa, careful not to disturb the children, and tiptoed toward the stairs leading to the basement. Each step felt heavier than the last, my mind racing with possibilities, none of which offered comfort. I remembered the folders on the computer, the encrypted files, the cryptic names and numbers, and I realized that whatever was happening below, it was connected to those files. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the air grew cooler, carrying a faint metallic scent mixed with a faint odor of electrical equipment. The hum of computers and the faint clicking of keyboards was louder now, echoing in the confined space. I paused, my hand resting lightly on the railing, listening intently. There was no movement that suggested human presence yet, but the machines were active, performing tasks I could not understand. I could feel my pulse quicken, my mind struggling to anticipate what I might discover. I moved a few steps closer, careful to remain in the shadows, and peered around the corner. The basement was partially illuminated by the pale glow of multiple computer screens. Their light created a surreal landscape of shadows and reflections across the walls and floor. I could see the faint outlines of keyboards, cords, and external hard drives, meticulously organized. Some of the screens displayed lines of code scrolling rapidly, while others showed documents and files I could not access. There was a rhythm to it, a system, and it became clear that this was not an ordinary home office or hobby setup. A sudden click of a keyboard made me jump. I froze, my ears straining to catch any additional sound. The click was precise, deliberate, and human. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. I realized then that someone must be present, operating the computers, yet I could see no movement, no figure. The shadowed space played tricks on my eyes, making the ordinary objects appear menacing. My mind raced, imagining every scenario from a simple late-night project to something far more dangerous. I tried to listen more carefully. There were muffled sounds now, whispers so soft that they almost merged with the hum of the electronics. I could not understand the words, yet the tone carried urgency and secrecy. My maternal instinct screamed at me to leave, to run upstairs and protect my children, yet curiosity held me in place. I could not ignore the signs any longer. Something was happening here, something that required vigilance and courage if I wished to uncover it safely. Slowly, I edged closer to the basement door, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. I could see that the screens were displaying a mixture of documents, spreadsheets, and what appeared to be encrypted files. Lines of code flashed intermittently across one monitor, while another displayed what looked like financial transactions and account numbers. I realized with a growing sense of dread that my son and daughter-in-law were involved in something that went far beyond ordinary domestic secrecy. The complexity of the setup suggested knowledge, preparation, and intent. I could feel the tension building in my chest as I considered my next move. Should I confront them immediately, risking a sudden escalation? Should I retreat and observe from a safe distance, hoping for more clues to emerge? I was acutely aware of the stakes, not only for myself, but for my children. Their safety depended on careful action, yet my mind was drawn irresistibly toward understanding the full scope of the activity below. I took a cautious step toward the door, my fingers brushing against the cold wood. The hum of the computers seemed to intensify, and a flicker of light from one of the monitors illuminated a small portion of the basement. I caught a glimpse of a figure moving behind the screens, their movements deliberate and practiced. I could see the outline of my son, focused intently on the keyboard, his expression unreadable in the low light. My daughter-in-law appeared beside him briefly, carrying a notebook filled with notes and calculations, her gestures precise and controlled. They did not notice me. Their attention was consumed entirely by the task at hand, the screens, and the files. I felt a surge of both relief and apprehension. Relief that they had not detected my presence, and apprehension because the secrecy suggested that whatever they were doing, it was significant and potentially dangerous. My heart raced, and I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep my breathing quiet. I could not risk startling them or drawing attention to myself. I noticed a series of external hard drives neatly arranged along the floor, each labeled with dates and codes. Some of them were connected to the computers, lights blinking steadily, indicating active transfers. My mind struggled to comprehend the scale and complexity of the operation. This was not a simple household project or a hobby. There was intent here, secrecy, and an investment of time and knowledge that I could not ignore. A sudden sound from the hallway above made me tense. The children shifted slightly in their sleep, murmuring softly, and I froze, listening intently. Everything remained still, yet the tension in the basement seemed to thicken, as if the air itself had grown heavier with anticipation. I realized then that I had entered a space I was not prepared for, yet I could not turn back. My curiosity, my need to understand, overpowered my fear. I crept closer to the edge of the staircase, careful to remain in the shadows. The hum of the computers filled my ears, almost drowning out my thoughts. I could see lines of encrypted code scrolling rapidly across one of the screens, and I realized with growing horror that my son and daughter-in-law were involved in something that could have far-reaching consequences. My pulse quickened, and I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had to know what they were doing, yet I had to be careful, for a single misstep could change everything. As I observed, I noticed that some of the documents displayed names and account numbers I recognized, including some that belonged to acquaintances and friends. My stomach tightened with the realization that the scope of this activity extended beyond our household. Whatever was happening in the basement was secret, deliberate, and potentially illegal. I felt a chill run down my spine. The calm before the storm had ended. The night had shifted, and the tension had transformed into something urgent, something that demanded action and clarity. I took another cautious step forward, and the soft click of my shoes on the floor seemed deafening in the quiet basement. My eyes darted between the computers, the external hard drives, and the shadows where figures moved. I understood then that the coming hours would define the safety of my children, the truth of my family, and the choices I would have to make. The night had grown suspicious, thick with secrecy, and I could no longer deny the reality that awaited me in the basement. The basement smelled of cold metal and electricity, a sharp, almost metallic tang that made my stomach twist. The hum of computers and the faint clicking of keyboards filled the air, a mechanical symphony that vibrated through the concrete floor beneath my feet. I froze at the top of the stairs, my breath shallow, my pulse racing, trying to make sense of the flickering lights and shadows that danced across the walls. My maternal instincts screamed at me to retreat, to run back upstairs and shield my children from whatever awaited below, yet my curiosity held me in place, drawing me closer to a truth I was not yet prepared to face. The basement stretched before me, more expansive than I had imagined, a cavern of technology and secrecy. Multiple computer monitors glowed with soft, pulsating light, casting long shadows that twisted across the room. External hard drives lined the edges of the concrete floor, each blinking with activity, their labels cryptic combinations of letters, numbers, and dates. Some were connected to the computers, some were idle, but each seemed to hold secrets that I was not meant to uncover. I inched closer, my hand brushing lightly against the railing. The hum of the electronics intensified, almost as if the machines were aware of my presence, sensing my intrusion into their hidden world. My eyes darted across the monitors. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across one, flashing sequences of numbers and symbols that I could barely comprehend. Another displayed encrypted files, some of them labeled with names that I recognized, names of friends, colleagues, and acquaintances, a realization that sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, a shadow moved near one of the desks. I froze, holding my breath. The figure bent over a keyboard, fingers flying across the keys with practiced precision. I recognized the posture, the gestures. It was my son. His face was illuminated intermittently by the light from the monitor, focused, intent, unaware of my presence. My heart clenched with confusion and fear. Beside him, my daughter-in-law moved with equal purpose, carrying notebooks and papers, jotting down notes, adjusting cables, and occasionally glancing at the screens with intense scrutiny. The hum of the electronics seemed to grow louder as I stepped closer, each movement deliberate and careful. I could see the complexity of the operation, the meticulous organization, and the precision in their work. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the scale of what I was witnessing. This was not an ordinary project or a harmless hobby. The documents, the encrypted files, the active hard drives, and the rapid sequences of code suggested planning, skill, and intent. My stomach tightened with a growing sense of dread. A sudden sound of a printer whirring startled me. I pressed myself against the railing, heart pounding. Sheets of paper emerged, each covered with data, numbers, and names. My son collected them carefully, stacking them with precision, while my daughter-in-law typed rapidly, inputting information into one of the connected computers. I realized then that they were compiling records, detailed and methodical, of activities that were hidden from everyone else, activities that I could not yet fully comprehend. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. I had to decide my next move carefully. I could retreat, but the sense of urgency and danger was too strong. Whatever they were doing could threaten my family, my children, and possibly others whose names appeared in the files. My maternal instincts urged me to protect, to act, but my rational mind reminded me that a single misstep could escalate the situation beyond control. I took another cautious step forward. The glow from the monitors illuminated small details. USB drives labeled with sequences of numbers and letters, folders stacked neatly, and a router with blinking lights that indicated multiple active connections. My son and daughter-in-law moved in synchrony, exchanging notes, adjusting devices, and entering commands. There was no ordinary domestic activity here. This was a network, a system, a secret operation that had been hidden beneath our very feet. As I watched, one of the monitors displayed what appeared to be financial records. My breath caught in my throat. The documents included account numbers, transactions, and data that were clearly meant to remain confidential. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the scope. They were manipulating information, accessing data that should not have been theirs, and storing it meticulously. My stomach twisted with a combination of fear, disbelief, and the dawning realization that our family's safety might be at risk. The hum of the electronics was accompanied by a faint mechanical clicking. I followed the sound and saw my daughter-in-law removing a small drive from one of the computers. She examined it carefully, then inserted it into another device, transferring files quickly and efficiently. My pulse quickened. This was not accidental or casual. They had been preparing, operating with intent, and hiding their activities with meticulous care. A sudden noise from the stairs above startled me. My children stirred slightly in their sleep. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp, fear gripping me. I could not alert them. I could not risk a confrontation here, not yet. My mind raced with possibilities. If they discovered me now, the consequences could be dangerous, not only for me but for the children as well. I had to act quickly and decisively. I moved closer to the edge of the basement landing, keeping to the shadows. The light from the monitors flickered across the concrete floor, revealing additional hard drives, wires, and devices that suggested even more complexity than I had first realized. My eyes caught a glimpse of files labeled with names of people I knew, some familiar, some strangers. I understood then that the activity below was far-reaching, involving more than just our household. The gravity of the situation pressed down on me, and I felt a chill that ran from my neck to the tips of my fingers. My son shifted in his chair, adjusting cables and tapping rapidly at the keyboard. My daughter-in-law leaned over, checking the output on another monitor. They did not notice my presence. I realized with a jolt that this was the opportunity one needed. I had to act now, to protect my children and gather what evidence I could without alerting them. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve hardened. I took another step, and the floorboard beneath my foot creaked. Instantly, both my son and daughter-in-law froze, their heads turning sharply toward the source of the sound. My heart raced. For a moment, I feared that everything had been discovered. But after a tense silence, they returned to their work, seemingly convinced that the noise had been nothing significant. I exhaled slowly, relief mixed with fear coursing through me. I realized then that I could not remain in the basement for long. I had to gather what I could and retreat before discovery. I scanned the room quickly, memorizing the positions of hard drives, the arrangement of devices, and the contents of the visible files. My mind absorbed details with urgency, committing everything to memory. I understood that the knowledge I possessed could be dangerous, yet it was also essential for the safety of my children and the exposure of the hidden activities. I turned to retreat when a new realization struck me. The basement was connected to the house network, possibly even to the internet, which meant that they could be monitoring activity remotely. I had to act quickly and decisively. My hands moved with careful precision as I retraced my steps to the stairwell. The hum of the computers followed me, a constant reminder of the complexity and secrecy that surrounded us. Finally, I reached the stairs. My children slept above, unaware of the storm brewing beneath their feet. My pulse raced, my hands were cold, and my mind reeled from the realization that our lives had changed in an instant. Whatever I had witnessed in the basement was beyond ordinary comprehension. It was a hidden world, a dangerous network of activity, and I knew with certainty that I had to protect my children at all costs. With a deep breath, I began to ascend the stairs, my heart pounding. The basement remained below, humming with the hidden operations of my son and daughter-in-law. I understood that our family's future, the safety of my children, and the truth about the secrets buried in the basement depended on the actions I would take next. The storm had begun, and I had no choice but to face it with courage, clarity, and resolve. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed that the walls themselves might hear it. I could still feel the hum of the computers in the basement vibrating in my chest, relentless reminder of the secrets I had just uncovered. My mind raced with questions, none of which had answers yet. I had to move, had to get to my children before anything escalated further. I turned swiftly toward the stairs, careful not to make any unnecessary noise, yet every step felt heavier than the last, as if the floor itself sought to betray my movements. I reached the top of the stairs and paused, listening intently. My children slept quietly, their breathing steady, and I allowed myself a fleeting moment of relief. Their innocence was a fragile shield against the chaos below. I could not afford to disturb it unnecessarily. I crept past their rooms, glancing inside to ensure they were safe. Each doorway I passed seemed to close in behind me, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the hallway. I reminded myself to stay calm, yet fear pressed against my chest like a physical weight. The basement door was still slightly ajar, and I could feel the presence of my son and daughter-in-law below. The faint click of a keyboard echoed in the background, along with the low mechanical hum of the computers. It was a rhythm that threatened to pull me back, to keep me trapped in the space I had just witnessed. I forced myself to move forward, clutching my children's small hands as we approached the front door. Their softness, their vulnerability, reminded me why I could not hesitate. I had to escape, and I had to be swift. I reached the front door and turned the knob quietly. The door opened smoothly, revealing the cool night air. It smelled of damp earth and distant rain, a scent that offered both relief and urgency. I guided the children out, whispering to them to remain silent, to move quickly. Their eyes were wide with confusion, yet they obeyed instinctively, trusting me entirely. My mind raced with possibilities. Could they follow us? Would they notice our absence before we reached safety? I knew that hesitation could be dangerous, so I pushed all doubts aside, focusing solely on getting out of the house. We moved swiftly down the driveway, the children clinging to my sides. Each step brought a mixture of relief and fear. The quiet of the night seemed fragile, almost deliberate, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears, and I reminded myself to breathe evenly, to keep the children calm. The darkened street stretched ahead, offering both sanctuary and uncertainty. I did not know where we could go, but staying in the house was no longer an option. A sudden noise behind us made me freeze. The metallic creak of the basement door closing reverberated through the quiet night. I realized then that they must have discovered something was amiss. My pulse quickened, and I urged the children to move faster, their small legs scrambling to keep pace with mine. I could feel fear pressing against me from every direction. The shadows of the house seemed to reach out, to warn me, to pull me back, yet I pressed forward with unwavering determination. I led the children to the car, parked under the dim glow of the streetlight. The keys were in my pocket, cold against my fingers. I unlocked the doors quickly and guided them inside. The interior of the vehicle smelled faintly of leather and antiseptic, a comfort against the overwhelming tension of the night. I started the engine, the soft rumble of the motor filling the car, offering a sense of control in the chaos. We moved slowly at first, cautiously, listening for any sign that we were being followed. The children huddled close, their small hands gripping mine, and I whispered reassurances, knowing that they would remember this night forever. The streets were deserted, the quiet amplifying the sound of the engine and our own movement. I navigated carefully, avoiding familiar paths that might lead anyone back to us. Each turn was deliberate, each movement calculated. My mind replayed the scenes from the basement, the monitors, the encrypted files, the external drives, and the quiet intensity of my son and daughter-in-law. I could not comprehend the full extent of their actions, yet I understood enough to know that we were in danger. We drove for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only minutes, until I found a small park on the outskirts of the neighborhood. I pulled the car into a shadowed area, hidden by trees and the faint glow of a distant street lamp. I turned off the engine and let the silence settle over us. My children were exhausted, their small bodies leaning against me, trusting completely. I breathed deeply, allowing myself a moment of relief, yet I knew that the danger had not passed. The storm had begun, and we were in the eye of it, vulnerable and exposed. I checked my phone. No messages, no calls. I realized that they could have anticipated our actions, that they might have access to our communications. The thought sent a chill through me. I could not call anyone for help without revealing our location. We were on our own, dependent on stealth, intelligence, and the will to survive. I held the children close, whispering reassurances, while my mind raced through every possible scenario. I had to plan our next move, yet I had only fragments of information to guide me. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps reached my ears. I tensed immediately. They had found us. The darkness of the park was both a shield and a trap. I could not see the source of the sound, yet I knew it was close. I whispered to the children to remain silent, to stay low, and I grabbed my bag containing essential items. I had packed lightly, knowing that speed was more important than comfort. Each step I took was deliberate, each movement cautious, as I guided the children through the shadows. We moved toward the edge of the park, where a narrow path led into a less visible area. The footsteps grew louder, and I realized that whoever followed us was moving with purpose. My heart pounded, yet I forced myself to remain calm. Panic would only slow us down, make us visible, and endanger the children. I focused on every detail, the direction of the shadows, the faint rustle of leaves, the patterns of light and dark that could conceal our movement. A low, urgent whisper escaped my lips as I encouraged the children to move faster. Their small hands held mine tightly, their trust unwavering. I could feel their fear, yet I also felt their resilience, their instinct to follow me blindly. The night pressed against us, a living entity filled with unseen eyes and dangers. I reminded myself of the basement, of the secret network, of the possibility that every step we took could be monitored. The tension was suffocating, yet I could not hesitate. We reached a dense area of trees and bushes. I guided the children into the cover, pressing them close to me. I crouched low, listening intently. The footsteps slowed, paused, then continued in the distance. Relief flooded through me, but I knew better than to relax completely. They could be regrouping, could be watching, could strike at any moment. I whispered reassurances to the children, stroking their hair, telling them it would be all right, even as my mind raced through plans for the next move. After a few minutes of tense silence, I decided we had to continue. The night was too dangerous to remain in one place. I led the children carefully, moving from shadow to shadow, avoiding open spaces, always aware of the possibility that we were being tracked. The cool night air mixed with my fear and determination, a heady combination that sharpened every sense. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the faint rustle of animals, and the whisper of leaves. Each sound a guide, each shadow a potential shield. Eventually, we reached a side street that appeared deserted. I guided the children onto the sidewalk, moving briskly but cautiously. Our destination was uncertain, yet movement was essential. I had to get them to safety, to a place where we could regroup, plan, and protect ourselves. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on me, yet I also felt a surge of determination. I would not allow fear to paralyze me. My children's lives depended on my courage, my foresight, and my ability to remain calm in the face of chaos. The night stretched on, each moment filled with tension and anticipation. Yet I pressed forward, drawing on every reserve of strength, every fragment of courage, every instinct that had kept me alert and alive. The storm was not yet over, but we had survived the first wave. The basement, the secret, the immediate danger, all of it had propelled us into a new reality, one that demanded vigilance, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. The first few hours after our escape felt unreal. The night air had grown colder, the streets eerily silent, and every shadow seemed to carry a hidden threat. My children clung to me tightly, exhausted yet frightened, their small bodies trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. I led them through quiet streets and side alleys, careful to remain unseen, always alert to the possibility that someone might be following us. Each step was deliberate, each movement cautious. I could not afford even a moment of distraction. Their safety depended entirely on my vigilance and quick thinking. Finally, I found a small, dimly lit park on the outskirts of the neighborhood. I guided the children into a sheltered area, beneath the low branches of a thick tree that offered both concealment and a measure of protection. I knelt beside them, brushing hair from their faces, whispering reassurances that felt fragile even to my own ears. The adrenaline that had driven me through the escape was beginning to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its place. My body trembled, my legs weak, and my mind was consumed by the weight of what we had just left behind. I tried to process the events of the night. The basement, the computers, the encrypted files, the external hard drives, everything suggested meticulous planning and deliberate secrecy. My son and daughter-in-law were involved in something that went far beyond ordinary domestic matters. They had hidden a network of activities that involved personal information, financial records, and data that could potentially endanger not only our family, but others as well. The gravity of their actions pressed down on me, leaving me both horrified and determined. As I sat with the children, watching them rest and regain some sense of normalcy, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. The basement, the computers, and the hidden files represented a betrayal that I could never have anticipated. Yet the night's events had also revealed the strength of my instincts, the depth of my resolve, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. Fear had guided me to action, but courage had ensured our survival. The morning was quiet, the sun barely breaking through a thin layer of clouds, casting a soft, muted light across the streets. I had spent the night awake, reviewing every detail I had observed in the basement, every movement, every file, every line of code that had flashed across the monitors. The children slept peacefully for now, a fragile illusion of safety that I was determined to protect. I knew that today would require action, that the truth could no longer remain hidden, and that confrontation was inevitable. I made a plan, careful and deliberate. There could be no hesitation, no rash decisions. The basement held secrets too dangerous, too far-reaching to ignore. I would confront my son and daughter-in-law, but I would do so with evidence and clarity, ensuring that their attempts to deflect, deny, or manipulate could be met with irrefutable truth. The children would remain at our relative's home, safe and unaware, while I faced the confrontation alone, prepared for whatever reaction awaited. I arrived at the house early, the familiar streets appearing deceptively calm. Every step felt heavy, laden with the weight of anticipation and fear. The front door stood before me, ordinary and innocuous, yet behind it lay the network of secrecy and deception I had discovered. I paused, taking a deep breath, and reminded myself that courage and precision would be my allies. There was no turning back. The truth demanded exposure. I entered quietly. The house was empty, the rooms eerily silent. My son and daughter-in-law were not yet awake, or perhaps they were elsewhere, unaware that the confrontation I had planned would come sooner than they anticipated. I moved to the computer room, the door still locked as it had always been, and retrieved the notes I had prepared, the detailed account of every observation, every file, every hard drive, and encrypted document I had witnessed. The weight of those notes in my hands was both comforting and sobering. They were proof, yet also a reminder of the betrayal that had occurred. I waited, pacing quietly, my mind replaying the events of the previous night. I thought of the basement, the hum of the computers, the flickering monitors, the meticulous organization, and the deliberate secrecy. I thought of my children, their innocence, their trust, and their vulnerability. The stakes were immense, yet I understood that inaction was no longer an option. The confrontation would happen, and it would be decisive. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced their arrival. I positioned myself near the doorway, notes in hand, heart pounding. My son appeared first, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion as he saw me standing there. My daughter-in-law followed, her posture defensive, her eyes wary. The room seemed to shrink around us, filled with tension, accusation, and unspoken truths. I spoke first, my voice calm but firm. I detailed what I had seen, step by step, from the basement, the computers, the files, and the external hard drives. I described the financial records, the encrypted data, and the meticulous organization of their secret operations. My words were deliberate, precise, leaving no room for ambiguity. As I spoke, I watched their reactions closely. My son's eyes widened at first, then narrowed, a mixture of disbelief and defensiveness. My daughter-in-law's expression hardened, yet there was a flicker of acknowledgement that could not be denied. I presented the notes I had taken, the descriptions of the network, the code, and the documents. I emphasized the seriousness of their actions, the potential consequences, and the betrayal of trust that had permeated our household. The silence that followed my words was heavy, oppressive, and charged with tension. I could see the realization settling in, the acknowledgement that their secrecy had been uncovered and that accountability was inevitable. My son attempted to speak, to offer explanations, to justify the actions I had witnessed. I listened, but I did not interrupt. His words were calculated, careful, yet I could see the cracks in his composure, the inconsistency between his statements and the evidence before him. I pressed gently but firmly, asking specific questions, referencing the files, the code, and the external drives. Each question was met with hesitation, deflection, or partial truth, reinforcing the clarity of the confrontation. My daughter-in-law's responses were similarly measured, defensive, yet unable to fully contradict the evidence I had gathered. The network of secrecy, the encrypted files, and the meticulous operations left them with no plausible deniability. I observed their body language, the tightening of muscles, the fleeting expressions of guilt and apprehension, and I knew that the confrontation was effective. The truth was undeniable, the exposure complete, and the consequences unavoidable. As the confrontation continued, I reminded them of the stakes, the safety of my children, the integrity of our household, and the potential legal and social ramifications of their actions. I emphasized the necessity of transparency, cooperation, and corrective measures. I watched as the tension in the room shifted from defensiveness to realization, from secrecy to acknowledgement. The basement, the computers, the files, and the network could no longer be hidden. After a long, tense period, my son and daughter-in-law finally acknowledged the full scope of their actions. The admission was hesitant at first, then more comprehensive, as if the weight of exposure had broken the carefully constructed facade of secrecy. I listened, recording mentally each detail, each admission, ensuring that the truth was clear and complete. The confrontation had achieved its purpose. The secret was revealed, the deception dismantled, and the path forward illuminated. With the confrontation concluded, I focused on the next steps. I outlined the actions required to secure the evidence, protect our family, and prevent further harm. I emphasized cooperation, accountability, and corrective measures, ensuring that the gravity of the situation was understood. The atmosphere in the room, once charged with tension and fear, began to shift toward resolution and cautious planning. I spent time reviewing the digital evidence with them, ensuring that the network was disabled, the files secured, and the hard drives accounted for. My son and daughter-in-law were cooperative, now aware that secrecy was no longer possible and that their actions had been fully exposed. The process was meticulous, deliberate, and essential to prevent further complications. Each step reinforced the reality of accountability and the necessity of transparency. Finally, I addressed the emotional aftermath. I spoke to them about trust, responsibility, and the impact of their actions on our family, especially the children. The discussion was difficult, emotionally charged, yet necessary. I emphasized the importance of honesty, integrity, and the restoration of trust. My children remained with relatives during this process, shielded from the full scope of the confrontation, yet their future safety and emotional well-being were central to every decision I made. By the end of the day, a tentative resolution had been reached. The basement was secured, the computers and external drives accounted for, and the digital network dismantled. The truth had been confronted, the secrecy exposed, and the path toward accountability and reconciliation established. The confrontation had been intense, exhausting, and emotionally draining, yet it was also transformative. Clarity had replaced uncertainty, exposure had replaced deception, and the foundations for trust and protection were being rebuilt. As I left the house, I felt a sense of cautious relief. The confrontation had been successful, the truth revealed, and the immediate danger mitigated. My children remained safe, my family's integrity partially restored, and the lessons of vigilance, courage, and maternal instinct reaffirmed. The storm had passed, though its echoes would linger, shaping our actions, choices, and relationships in the days to come. The days that followed the confrontation were both quiet and tense. Our household, once filled with ordinary routines, now carried the weight of exposure, betrayal, and reflection. I spent long hours with my children, guiding them through a fragile normalcy while carefully shielding them from the full magnitude of the events that had unfolded. Their laughter returned slowly, cautiously, yet the innocence of their world had been subtly altered. I reminded myself that time and patience were essential, that healing required both emotional care and steady presence. I often found myself alone in the evenings, sitting by the window and watching the sky darken. The world seemed deceptively calm, the familiar streets peaceful, yet I knew that beneath that calm lay lessons, consequences, and responsibilities that could not be ignored. The basement, the computers, and the hidden network had been exposed, but the emotional aftermath lingered. I reflected on the courage it had taken to act, the fear that had driven me, and the clarity that had guided every decision. Each memory was a reminder of both vulnerability and strength. My relationship with my son and daughter-in-law had shifted profoundly. The confrontation had stripped away pretense, leaving only the stark reality of actions and consequences. We had engaged in difficult conversations, addressing trust, responsibility, and the impact of secrecy on our family. Their acknowledgement of wrongdoing and willingness to cooperate in dismantling the hidden network had been necessary steps toward reconciliation. Yet I remained cautious, understanding that rebuilding trust would require sustained effort, transparency, and accountability. The children's presence remained my anchor. I watched them sleep, their small bodies curled in familiar positions, and I felt both relief and renewed determination. They were unaware of the full details of the basement and the hidden activities, yet they sensed the tension that had permeated our household. I focused on creating a sense of security, a foundation of stability, and a routine that would allow them to regain the confidence and innocence that had been threatened. Each small smile, each quiet moment of play felt like a victory in the ongoing process of emotional restoration. I also turned my attention to the digital aspect of the exposure. With the help of a trusted friend experienced in cybersecurity, we had secured all computers, external drives, and digital records. The encrypted files had been documented, their contents understood, and the network dismantled. This process was meticulous, deliberate, and necessary to prevent further harm or unintended consequences. Every detail was carefully reviewed, ensuring that the evidence of secrecy was both preserved and neutralized. The sense of control this provided was a counterbalance to the chaos of the initial discovery. I reflected on the choices I had made, the instincts that had guided me, and the courage required to act decisively. The escape from the house, the careful observation of the basement, and the eventual confrontation had been fraught with fear and uncertainty, yet they had also revealed resilience and determination that I had not fully recognized in myself. I understood then that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it, and that maternal instinct could be both protective and decisive in the face of danger. The confrontation itself remained vivid in my memory. The evidence I had presented, the clarity of my observations, and the eventual acknowledgement of wrongdoing had shifted the balance of power. I had faced betrayal and secrecy directly, and in doing so, had reclaimed agency over our household and the safety of my children. The emotional intensity of that moment, coupled with the practical necessity of dismantling the hidden network, had created a profound sense of accomplishment, tempered by the recognition that trust, once broken, required ongoing effort to restore. I also reflected on the lessons that extended beyond the immediate crisis. The experience had underscored the importance of vigilance, communication, and discernment. It had revealed the complexities of human behavior, the potential for secrecy even among those closest to us, and the necessity of acting with both courage and caution. These insights were invaluable, shaping not only my approach to family dynamics but also my understanding of responsibility, accountability, and personal strength. In the weeks that followed, we worked together as a family to restore a sense of routine and stability. The basement was repurposed, the computers removed or secured, and the household system simplified. I observed my son and daughter-in-law engaging in honest, open communication, their behavior measured and deliberate. I monitored interactions closely, guiding discussions and ensuring that transparency became a consistent practice. The process was gradual, requiring patience and vigilance, yet each step toward openness reinforced the foundation of trust that we were rebuilding. The children adapted slowly but steadily. Their laughter returned more freely, their curiosity blossomed, and the sense of security that I had worked to cultivate began to take root. We spent time outdoors, engaged in familiar routines, and re-established rituals that had been disrupted by fear and secrecy. Each small success, each moment of genuine joy, felt significant, a tangible marker of resilience and recovery. I documented these moments carefully, reminding myself of the importance of presence, patience, and emotional support in the process of healing. I also reflected on my own growth throughout the experience. The fear, the urgency, and the confrontation had revealed inner strengths that I had not fully recognized. I had acted decisively, protected my children, and confronted the truth with clarity and courage. The experience reinforced the value of observation, preparation, and strategic action, while also highlighting the emotional intelligence required to manage fear, protect loved ones, and navigate complex human dynamics. These lessons would remain with me, shaping future decisions and interactions within our family. The exposure of the basement's secrets had also prompted broader reflection on boundaries, trust, and ethical responsibility. I recognized the importance of vigilance in safeguarding personal and digital spaces, the necessity of questioning inconsistencies, and the value of acting with informed intuition. These reflections extended beyond the immediate crisis, informing a more deliberate, careful approach to household management, communication, and oversight. The experience had created a lasting awareness, a framework for maintaining both safety and trust in the future. Over time, the tension that had gripped our household began to ease. The immediate threat had been addressed, the evidence secured, and the hidden network dismantled. My children thrived in the restored environment. My son and daughter-in-law engaged in measured efforts to rebuild trust, and I found a sense of stability that had been absent during the nights of fear and uncertainty. The lessons of courage, vigilance, and maternal instinct had been reinforced, forming the foundation for ongoing recovery and resilience. As the weeks turned into months, I allowed myself moments of reflection and gratitude. I acknowledged the fear, the urgency, and the high stakes, yet I also recognized the resilience, determination, and clarity that had guided every action. The confrontation had revealed truth, the aftermath had demanded careful planning, and the ongoing process of reflection and resolution had reinforced the bonds that remained within our family. I understood that recovery was continuous, but that each deliberate step taken with courage and clarity strengthened the foundation for a safer, more transparent future. Finally, I allowed myself to envision a life beyond the immediate crisis. The basement, the computers, and the hidden network were no longer threats, but lessons etched into our collective memory. The children's laughter, the restored routines, and the gradual rebuilding of trust represented the enduring resilience of family and the transformative power of courage. I understood that while fear and secrecy had tested us, the deliberate, measured, and courageous actions we had taken had reclaimed both safety and integrity. I closed my eyes briefly, taking a deep, steadying breath. The storm had passed, though its echoes remained as lessons, reminders, and sources of growth. The basement's secrets had been confronted, the danger mitigated, and the path forward illuminated. We had survived, learned, and grown stronger. The reflection and resolution were not merely an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter, one grounded in vigilance, honesty, and the unwavering bond between a mother and her children. The night had passed, and the world outside seemed calm once more, as if unaware of the turmoil that had unfolded within our household. The tension, fear, and uncertainty that had consumed the hours now lingered only as quiet memories, a reminder of how quickly life could change. I watched my children play in the safety of our temporary home, their laughter soft and genuine, and I felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. Their innocence, once threatened, was beginning to return, and with it, the hope that stability and safety could be restored. I reflected on the events that had brought us to this point, the basement, the hidden computers, the encrypted files, and the meticulous secrecy of my son and daughter-in-law. Each detail, once terrifying, had become a lesson, a marker of vigilance, courage, and resilience. The confrontation had revealed truth, the escape had preserved life, and the aftermath had demanded careful, deliberate action. I understood that fear could be a guide, but only courage and clarity could ensure survival. The process of recovery was ongoing, and I accepted that fully. Trust, once broken, could not be restored overnight. Yet the steps we had taken, exposure, accountability, and protection, had laid a foundation for healing. The children's laughter, the restored routines, and the gradual rebuilding of honesty within our family were proof that even in the face of betrayal and danger, resilience could triumph. I allowed myself to feel proud, not just for surviving, but for acting decisively to protect those I loved. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light across the room, I felt a sense of closure. The basement secrets were no longer hidden, the danger had been confronted, and the lessons of vigilance, responsibility, and courage had been firmly established. The future remained uncertain in many ways, yet it was also filled with promise, strengthened by the knowledge that we had faced fear and acted with clarity and determination. I took a deep breath, allowing the quiet moments to wash over me. The storm had tested us, exposed weaknesses, and demanded courage, but it had also revealed the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. I understood that the memories of the night would remain, but they would no longer control us. Instead, they would serve as a reminder of strength, presence, and the power of deliberate action in the face of danger. In that quiet reflection, I found peace. We had survived, we had confronted the truth, and we had taken the first steps toward lasting safety and trust. The basement, once a place of secrets and fear, was now a symbol of lessons learned, vigilance restored, and courage realized. And in the calm of that morning, I knew that while the past could not be undone, the future could be shaped by wisdom, love, and unwavering determination.